So I wanted to do this video where I'm talking about my favorite heroines. Now, I will start off saying, like, I think the reason why I like these heroines the most out of like some other heroines is probably because I can empathize a lot with these heroines. You know, like, if you can make me empathize with a character and really feel for a character, that's what really makes me love them, you know, of maybe like the things they do or maybe the sacrifices they go through. Those are the things that I find the most interesting with a character, is if I can really find empathy and feel for that character, you know. That's what makes me like, I love that character, you know, not just like their personality, but their character, their drive, what fuels them, you know, in their life, you know. So there's those. So the first one I would have to mention that is a favorite of mine is Esther from Hero. Now, this is the Claire Kent Kindle series, and some of the heroes or heroines in there are okay, and then other ones that I was like, I absolutely loved. Esther's like one of those characters where I try not to self-insert. That's the, like, one thing I try not to do, is I try not to self-insert, because I think if you get too overly invested with a character and then somebody critiques that character, it could get you like you wanting to defend them, and it's like, well, they're fictional. You don't have to defend them, you know? And especially because it's like, no character is perfect. Everyone has flaws and faults, and, you know, we're human. We're going to make mistakes, you know? So with Esther, it's like she had a lot of anxiety, so it made her very, like, overly aware of her surroundings and different things like that. It made her very, like, stubborn and independent. And I loved her character because she did whatever she could to protect the male character in her life. And even though at the beginning of the book, she really disliked him a lot because of like the things he had did. Like, I'd say either before the asteroid hit, before the post-apocalyptic world that they're in, or maybe things that he did while they were living with each other. But she at first didn't care for him, and she basically started to warm up to him and everything. And I loved the fact that she was willing to sacrifice her own life if it meant to protect someone, to protect other people, like protect the hero and protect the little girl that she grew to love, like, as like her own. Because the story basically is about, you know, Esther and, I think his name was Zed. I think so. I think his name was Zed or something like that. Something weird like that. And he has a daughter named Katrina, but she goes by, I think it's Rena. I think they call her Rena. And so he had knocked up this chick that he was seeing before before Impact. You know, I guess you say that, before Impact. Before Impact, he had knocked up, you know, he was very irresponsible. I guess you'd say one of those people who's very irresponsible in life. And he had impregnated her. And so when Impact happened, him, Esther's stepdad, which was Zed's brother, you know, older brother, they all had basically, you know, lived in this cabin all together. You know, obviously, you know, it's better to be power in numbers, you know, work together and everything. And now they've pretty much are down to just the three of them, because his ex there had passed away, and they had like her sister and her mother and her stepdad, and I think she had grandparents too, all have perished. Because basically a sickness had basically come in. I don't want to keep saying basically. I've done that how many times? I catch myself all the time doing it, and I'm like, why am I saying that? but a sickness had come in and killed off a lot of people. It's almost like whatever was attached to the asteroid had caused like this weird thing that happened with the air, and so it caused a lot of people to die of like this sickness. And so now it's just Esther, Zed, and Rena. And so of course Esther came to care for Rena and almost think of her as like her own daughter. So I loved Esther's sacrifice, that she was willing to die if it meant to protect Rena and Zed, And you would think like a lot of times it's usually the male that kind of throws himself in kind of like the line of fire of like, I'll protect, you take, But for herself, she thought, I'm expendable. That's what she thought of herself. She's like, I'm expendable. That's his daughter, Rena is his daughter. That's her father. If something happens to her father, that's it. She's gonna, Rena's not gonna have anybody, because she doesn't remember her mother. And so Esther's like, but if I sacrifice myself, Rena will still have Zed, I loved her character. I loved that self-sacrifice, because I do find there are women out there in the world who tend to be very selfish, and they will sacrifice other people if it means saving themselves. There are types of women out there who will try to act all tough and be like, I'm a feminist, but as soon as like shit hits the fan, they're like, I'm just a girl, protect me. Yeah. Women, there are some women out there who show their hypocrisy, that they're not as strong as they portray themselves to be. So I love the fact that Esther was willing to like put herself out there to sacrifice herself if it meant protecting that little girl and her father, So I loved her character. She's definitely like one of my favorite characters out of like the whole series, in the Kindle series. I mean, there's other ones I like too, but I'd say Esther's probably my favorite. I loved that book when I read it because I loved her character. And I loved the fact that it had like this anxiety rip, where it's like her constantly being like, something bad could happen. And so it made her like hyper vigilant and hyper aware. And I'm like, I kind of like identified in a way of that character. Like I said, I'm not trying to self-insert, but because she did have flaws, obviously. But I empathize for their character a lot, because I was like, I know what it's like to have anxiety, where it's like that fear anxiety, that anxiety of like protection, protect. I've always had that, and that's something that I've realized over the years is, wow, I haven't realized I've had anxiety for many years, like more years than what I thought I have, like with my ex, it came out like a lot. Like I very much had a lot of uncontrolled anxiety after I had got away from my ex, because he was an emotional abuser. And so I didn't realize like, I was using this stuff as like self-protection, so it took me a while to get my anxiety more under control. And even now it's like, I still have like bouts of sometimes my, like the hairs on the back of your neck stand up, trying to use your gut instinct, and so I find a lot of women tend to deal with like a lot of anxiety, because women tend to have more of like almost like an ESP, where we kind of sense that something's gonna happen, or can sense that something's bad. Women tend to be more hyper aware than men do. At least that's what I found. There are obviously men out there who have that too, but a lot of women tend to be more hyper-aware of different stuff. And so I very much identified with Esther in that sense of like her having that anxiety. And I'm like, that's exactly how it would be like if I was in that situation. So I very much empathized with her character a lot. So yeah, I did like her a lot. So let me go on to the next one, because I could talk an hour about that character. So the next one I would say is Jessica Trent. She's from Lord of Scoundrels, I think it is. I think it's Scoundrels. Yeah, it is. It's Scoundrels. Lord of Scoundrels. Jessica Trent, I loved her as a heroine because when it comes to historical heroines, I don't want them to be too modern, because then it just doesn't make sense for that time period. Because I know back then women didn't have or weren't allowed that agency that we are now. Like, this is why I have a hard time when women will claim that we're still oppressed, or I'm like, look, if you're in a third world country, I get it. But if you're here in the US, you are not oppressed. You are not oppressed. We've hit the glass ceiling. We've broke through the glass ceiling, you know? So I like historical heroines that, even though they may not have that agency of owning land, having the, being able to vote, being able to have a job, things like that. Those were not very much possibilities for certain points of history. Women weren't allowed to do that. And if women were in those roles, it was very much rare. So I like to see a heroine where, even though she may not have that agency, she still, has common sense. She still wants to better herself. She still wants to be equal to a man, So when it came to Jessica Trent, I loved her character because she was so smart and she was unapologetic about it. Like back in that time, women couldn't really portray themselves as like being intelligent and being smart and all that stuff, because there were plenty of men who would be like, oh, well, we don't want a woman to think, There were men like that who were like, oh, well, you should just sew and, be a hostess, and stuff like that, And so there was plenty of men out there who and I'm not saying all men, but there were plenty of men out there back in the day who were like, oh no, I want my wife to just look pretty for me, kind of thing, on my arm and all that stuff. So I love the fact that she was very unapologetic about her intelligence. And I love that for her. And I think that was the reason why the hero was first intrigued with her, because she was so unapologetic about what she knew. Like they were in this antique store. And so she was, showing that she knew what she was talking about when she was, looking at these different art, antique pieces and stuff. So I really love the fact that she was very unapologetic about her intelligence. And I really love that about her. I also love her determination, because he, the hero was very much like this sort of like anti-hero, a bit of a villain in a way. And she obviously is attracted to him, but she doesn't want to admit that she's attracted to him. And he was one of these characters where he was mistreated when he was younger by his father, and basically called ugly. So it made him like more of like, well, if I'm ugly on the outside, I'm going to be ugly on the inside. And so she really kind of like brought out the best in him and made him to where he wanted to be a better person, like for her. And also when he had hurt her like in a way that it embarrassed her socially. And that was kind of like his way of like lashing out. She shot him. I loved that scene where she was like, oh, you think that you can go and get the best of me? I don't think so. And so her thing of like, I'm going to shoot your ass. Loved her. Loved her. And yeah, obviously she's like, afterwards she felt bad about it, but it's like her passion was in a way of like, I'm so passionate about this and so angry that I have to shoot him. And obviously he didn't die, in there. I think he got shot in like the shoulder or whatever it was. And so she was also a good shot too. Like she deliberately shot him in obviously that place, and she knew it wasn't like a death blow, but it was more of like, I'm punishing you and embarrassing you in public because you did the same to me. So I'm going to get back at you. So I loved her character. I thought she was like, and I don't see a lot of heroines like that, that are that way, that would be like, oh, I'm going to shoot your ass, There's only really a couple heroines that I've read about, like in historical romances, where they actually shot the hero. There's another book that, the heroine shot the hero. But yeah, that one, I loved Jessica Trent. I thought she was a great character. I loved her feistiness, and like I said, I loved her intelligence. I loved how she was just like, yeah, I'm smart. And I also like the fact that she was trying to protect her brother, because her brother was very much like a ninny. And he was, I guess you'd say, a follower. Like he was following with whatever the hero was doing. And the hero was deliberately doing stuff so it would piss Jessica off, And so I like the fact that she tried to protect her brother the best she could, So yeah, I love her character. I think she's a great favorite, one of my favorite heroines, is I loved, that's what made the book really good. Like, even though I love the hero, but I love the heroine too. Like sometimes it'll like, I love the hero, but maybe I'm not a big fan of the heroine, but I loved her too. I thought she was great character. It was a really good book. If you haven't read it, like definitely check it out. But yeah, I loved her character. She was just so interesting. Such a different character. So the next one I'll talk about is Sloane. This is Carnal Urges by J.T. Geisinger. I loved Sloane because she was so swift. Like she knew how to obviously like play with men's heads, but not in like obviously a bad way, but she knew how to kind of like get what she wanted. And so I loved her character because she ends up getting kidnapped by the hero. He's a part of like this Irish, I believe it was Irish mafia. And he had kidnapped her for like his boss, and then his boss ends up being, taken out, and so now he's the boss. And so now he's like, well, shit, I kidnapped her for my boss, and now I'm in charge, so what am I supposed to do with her? I can't just let her go. And so she had this way of like just putting like men around her finger and just totally like, not really, like I said, not taking advantage of them, but changing them, in a way of like, they absolutely were like devoted to her, and they would basically do anything to protect her. And that was her way of like self-preservation, There are like a lot of like, you could see it in like horror films and different things like that. There are like heroines or female characters where they are stupid as shit and have no self-preservation, like at all. And I'm like, how can you be so dumb? So like there are heroines like that, especially like in horror movies where I'm like, girl, you are dumb, So I love the fact that Sloane was very much one of those heroines where she had self-preservation, and she's like, look, I'm going to do whatever it takes to like save my own ass, So I loved her character, that she was that way. She had like what they'd say the gift of gab, where she knew how to talk to these men to kind of like get them to like, it almost was like, I would say, a Jedi mind trick, you know, like if you ever watch Star Wars, you will have like the Jedis who obviously have really great power, have a way of manipulating people. Like when it came to like the beginnings of Star Wars, you see Obi-Wan had that where he the starship, not starship troopers, the troopers, you know, the stormtroopers, I think that's what they were called, stormtroopers, um they were looking for droids and these people. And so when they came up to the area where they were driving, they were, you know, getting questioned, and Obi-Wan was like, these are not the droids you are looking for. And so they're like, these are not the droids we're looking for. And so like he totally like mind tricked them, you know? And he did the Jedi mind trick. And so that's basically what I felt like when it came to Sloane. I felt like she did like the Jedi mind trick on like so many of these heroes, so many of the male characters. And so especially when it came to the hero came to like absolutely adore her and like love her. And so I very much loved her character a lot. And so yeah, I felt like with her, she did like the Jedi mind trick when it came to men. But like I said, I don't feel like it was like she was manipulating them or doing it in a way of like it being malicious. It was just her self-preservation, you know? So yeah, I really love her character a lot. The next favorite of mine is Sarah from Dreaming of You. I love her character a lot because she basically came from like this small town. She wanted to do more for herself. So she became this author. And she also wanted to talk about basically the realities of women who were prostitutes living on the streets, and the hardships of what they have, you know, they had to go through. Because women, especially the women who were the prostitutes and the less fortunate and all that stuff, they were very much like overlooked and ignored, and not something that people had respect for, even though during those times women had no choice but to be in those positions because, you know, it's either that or starve. So, you know, Sarah saw something more with these women and decided she wanted to write a book based on like this character of this woman who dealt with the realities of being like, you know, a prostitute. And so I really loved her empathy, you know, I really loved her empathy. And okay, so as I was saying, I really liked Sarah a lot because of like I said, her empathy for others who are obviously less fortunate than her. She obviously didn't live like, I would say she wasn't wealthy, but I mean, she had parents that were older, that they, you know, they obviously had her at like older age, you know, like obviously I'm assuming that they probably had her when they were in their possible 40s and stuff. And so she had like almost elderly parents. And so she was very much like an only child. And so for her, it's not like she didn't have wealth, but she had like, obviously I'd say wealth in a way of like, she had a healthy home. Her parents very much like cared about her, wanted her to, you know, find a husband, you know, different things like that, you know, be able to take care of herself. So that way when they were gone, that she would be okay, you know? So I'd say she was rich in love in that way, you know? Some people are where they may be wealthy, but they're not rich in like friendships, like true friendships, or rich in like loving family, you know? So she very much had like a very loving family. And so she decides to travel, have the bravery to travel to London, knowing that it could be dangerous there, because she wanted to go and interview different women and things like that, people in like the service type of industry and all that stuff too. And there she meets Derek, who's the hero, and she ends up saving him because she sees that his face is getting cut up in the alley. And so she takes out her gun that she owns. And I was like, smart girl, has a weapon to protect herself. And she shoots one of the people. And I believe she ended up killing the person. I believe that person died. So she ended up, taking care of this person who was hurting the hero. And he takes a look at her and he's like, oh, well, this girl's, should not be in London. He's looking at her like, what are you doing here? You need to go back to where you came from, kind of thing, And he very much kind of like is very dismissive with her at first, but she was very determined, where she was like, no, I want to stay here and write my book. And the more time she spends with the hero, the more he sees like her bravery, her kindness, her empathy. And the more he, his hardened heart, that she manages to get through his like armor, manages to get through his like invisible armor that he's had for himself for many years. So she was able to open him up, and basically read him like a book, So I loved her character. She was very empathetic, very, what's the term? Like humanitarian, like she very much wanted to help others and, do that, like I'm trying to come up with like another word for it. I loved her though. Great character, brave, but knew her limitations, like knew she needed, Derek, like she fell for Derek, she looked past like all of the things that he was trying to present to her, kind of like to scare her off, she saw past that, but she still was like, I still love the fact that she was very feminine, still, like didn't have this like tough exterior of like, oh, well, I'm this woman and I can do everything kind of thing. She wasn't that way. I love the fact that she was still feminine, still needed like, Derek was protecting her, still had a way of protecting her. Because there was a scene where something could have happened to her if Derek didn't show up, to help her. And I loved her like resilience, like toward the end of the book, of something, something else happened. And she had to like rely on her own skills of like, getting the best of like this other character, So I loved her. And I loved her like vulnerability, like at the end, where she's with Derek. And I'm not going to, it gives away too much of the story if I explain, but I loved her vulnerability and her opening up to Derek and him like basically like reassuring her like that no matter what it is, he will always be there for her. Love that. I love that. It's such a great book. I love it so much. There's people who say like, they'll mention something with him. I'm not going to say what it is, but they'll mention something with him, like saying that he did this. And I was like, really? I didn't see that at all. So I guess it depends on like your interpretation of the book, and how you interpreted it. But yeah, I mean, she was such a great character. I loved her character. She's a favorite. She's definitely a favorite heroine of mine when it comes to like Lisa Kleypas's books. I love Sarah. I loved Sarah. The next one is definitely another Lisa Kleypas heroine. This one here is Amelia Hathaway from Mine Till Midnight. It's the Hathaway series. This one here has Amelia, and she's basically the eldest of the daughters, because you have like one boy, which is Leo, and then the rest are girls of her siblings. And I loved Amelia because I'd say I empathized with her character a lot because she was the eldest girl sibling. I think Leo was the eldest, if I remember correctly, or Amelia was first. I can't remember that, if Amelia was the oldest and then Leo, or Leo was the oldest and then her. Either way, she was like the oldest of all the female siblings. And so she very much had that protective instinct of like her being like responsible, because during the beginning of that series, Leo was very much like not there, mentally, because of things that happened in his past and stuff. And so when they found out that her brother inherited this title from a relative, a distant relative, she's like, well, we have to get the estate in order, but they don't really have like a lot of money to get the estate in order, and like, I believe at the beginning of the book, she had actually gone out to, I believe it was either a bar or a brothel. I can't remember correctly. I'd have to reread the book again. It's been a while since I've read it. But I want to say it was a brothel or a gambling hall or something like that. And so she went, she was going there to get her brother, to like drag him back to the estate, And that's where she met the hero, Cam. And Cam was, of course, in previous Lisa Kleypas novels. And I loved her, like, determination. I loved her, like I said, her responsibility of taking care of her siblings. Like, even though she was a female, and females usually are not the ones that take care of, like, the estate orders and all that stuff. It usually is the male in the family, because they're the ones that ended up with a title. Women didn't end up with a title. Even if, like, say, maybe Earl had, or whatever it is, if all the Earl had was girls, these girls have to get married, and it will pass, on to whoever the male is in the family. Like, the girls will never get a title. It's only the males that ended up with a title. So even though she knows she will never have that, like, status of a title, she still is trying to take care of her family, because her parents were that way. They very much loved their children and took care of them and wanted to put them on the right path, And her parents were very much like intellectuals, so she got like the same education as like her brother. And that was another thing that, like, in past women didn't get. Women didn't get that education that men did. And so I love the fact that her parents were very much like, no, we want our daughters to be just as intelligent as our son. I love that. I loved the fact that they very much were intellectuals, and they wanted all their children to be book smart, and know life, So I love that for Amelia, that she was very smart. She was stubborn, so I'll give her that. She was very kind of like stubborn and didn't want to get involved with Cam, in an intimate way, because, and it didn't have, and I love the fact that it didn't have anything to do with his heritage, because he is Romani. It didn't matter to her. She's like, I don't care, like, what his, culture is. She actually really liked learning more about his culture. It was like her stubbornness of like, I don't want to settle down because I need to take care of my family, and I need the person who I get involved with to know that my family matters to me. So I love the fact that she was, her family was like number one for her. So I love that with her character. And for me, I'm like, I can empathize with that, because I would be the same way, where I'm like, my family, I need to take care of my family, that was something that when I wasn't with my ex anymore and I was now like co-parenting with him, I knew that he wasn't going to be around much mentally and physically for my daughters, just the way he behaved. So I knew I needed like a stepfather for my children that would be physically and mentally there. Like I knew they needed a man in their life. Just statistically, single women raising the children and the father is not in the picture, statistically, those children don't do well. So there are those rare exceptions, like it's the exception to the rule. But usually within the rule, those children don't do well. So I knew I wanted to have someone who would be physically, and emotionally there for my children. And so my whole goal was I want a man who cares for me, but also cares for my children. And so my concern was for my children. Like I'm like, oh, I don't need a man if the man's going to be shit, Like I'm not going to go and get with a man just because I'm desperate to have a man. No, I want my children to have a man that they can look up to, So that was my priority. That was my goal when I was looking for someone, And it is harder for women who are single and that have children to find a man who wants to take on that responsibility. But I was lucky that I found my husband, and he is a father to my daughters. And that's more than what, he does more than, now I'm getting emotional. But yeah, he is a very good man, so he takes care of me and takes care of, my daughters, our daughters, even though he's not biologically their father, he's more of a father than their own father was. So that to me is more important than blood, biology. So yeah, for me, I really much identified and, empathized with Amelia because she very much wanted to take care of her siblings, even her brother who was dealing with a lot of different stuff. Like he was an alcoholic and I would say he was suicidal in a way, because when you are an addict, you really don't give a shit about your own self. You only care about that addiction. You only care about that next fix. You don't care if you live or die. And so Leo was in that, mind frame of not giving a shit. He only cared about himself because he had a lot of trauma of, something that happened to him. And so I loved Amelia for that because she was a protector. And so I could, empathize with her character a lot because like I said, I would be that same way, So yeah, I really liked Amelia. Really great character. Like I said, she's obviously not a perfect character. She does have flaws. But the characteristics that she had, I very much respect. So I love her character. The next one I would say I really was a big fan of is Catherine Caulfield. She's part of the Night Huntress series. Now this is by Janine Frost. And her character is, she's basically a half vampire because her mother was sexually assaulted. Very much reminds me of a female Blade. If you know the character of Blade, you know that his character, he was in utero, he was in the womb when his mother was attacked by a vampire, and so that's what made Blade a daywalker. Well, with Catherine, this man had basically just turned into a vampire, and so he ended up sexually assaulting Catherine's mother and ended up getting her pregnant because he obviously, sperm, if you know anything about sperm can kind of live outside the body for how many hours before it dies, it's resilient like that, it's weird. But it can work that way. So I think that's why Janine Frost kind of created that type of character is like, because sperm can last how long outside the body without it like dying. And so that vampire had like just turned, so it still had like obviously sperm, active sperm, and ended up impregnating Catherine's mother. And so Catherine was born and raised knowing that she was a child of sexual assault. And I mean, the mentality to know that, you know, how would you be as a person knowing that you were a child of sexual assault? You know, you have that sense of guilt, which isn't your fault. You know, you have this sense of guilt that if it wasn't for you, you know, your mother wouldn't constantly have that reminder, you know? But the way I think about it is like, just because that happened to you, it doesn't mean that that you should take it out on an innocent baby, you know? Her mother almost like took it out on her. I didn't like that. For the longest time, I really disliked Catherine's mother. I did not like her. And I can empathize and I can sympathize with what she had went through. I can certainly sympathize with what she went through. But you don't take that out on an innocent baby, you know, or an innocent child, and basically use this child as a way of like revenge and getting back at like the people who hurt you, you know. You don't use your child in that way. And so Catherine, I really loved her. Like, I empathize with her because, you know, I also have a parent that my parents' life didn't turn out the way she had pictured it. And so you end up taking it out on other people, and when it's your own fucking fault, you know? Obviously for Catherine's mother, she couldn't help with what happened to her. But I kind of like, you know, empathize with Catherine, whereas like I kind of like can empathize with her character in maybe like a similar way, but not obviously, you know, the exact way of like, you still have this love and connection to your parent, even though they don't treat you the way you want to be treated, you know? I loved Catherine in that. And, I loved how she was like just very determined, very independent, mentally strong. And she ended up becoming like basically like this, almost like a vampire slayer. She kind of reminds me a bit of like Blade and Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Like if Buffy was a half vampire, you know? That's what she kind of reminded me of. Was she was just this badass character where she dealt with a lot of different stuff, like growing up, and then also her family, like her grandparents were like very like religious based. And so that's why Catherine's mother never got like a deletus the fetus, because her parents were very much like, you don't do that, you know? And so her grandparents were very religious. And so even they kind of like didn't have this like, I would say, love for their grandchild that they should have had, you know? And like I said, you don't take it out on an innocent baby, you know? But I loved Catherine for all of the different mental hardships that she grew up with, and knowing that she is a half vampire, you know, learning about all that stuff, learning about like all of the world of the vampires, her getting to know Bones, and then being a part of like this, like an FBI or CIA kind of like type of thing. I really loved her character and all of the different like trials that she ends up going through to really like show who she really was like as a person, and all of the like, I guess you'd say gifts. Like she did have some gifts from it, you know. Uh, but yeah, I really liked her character a lot. She was a really interesting character. And she's what made that series like really good, you know, is her character. Okay, so the next one I would talk about is Mercy Thompson. Now, I'm still reading this series, but man, I really, it depends on like when I post this video of like how far along I am in the series. But I like Mercy Thompson because she's such an interesting character. Like she is what they call a walker. She's basically like a coyote shifter. And so she is like, you know, a tough cookie. She's, you know, very like self-preservation. She knows like her limitations and stuff, but she also fights for everyone around her. Like she is a protector. You know, she is, you know, she puts herself in harm's way if it means to protect others, you know, even though she shouldn't put herself in harm's way, but she does. And she gets herself into these situations where she's got to like figure out how to get out of them, you know. So I really enjoy her character a lot. I think she's a really interesting character. And I love like how every book kind of like you learn more things about her. But she has this like compassion, and also like domestic like type of like like a motherly type of like instinct and stuff too, because she would be at home, and like one of her things that she liked to do was cook like bake cookies and things like that. So it's like she very much had that like domestic aspect too, you know, like she knew how to take care of others, you know, and look out for the ones who she felt like not weak, but you know, felt like she needed to take care of, you know. So I can empathize with her because I'm very much that same way where I like to bake cookies, and I like to like take care of home, you know, and she very much is that way too, where she likes to take care of home. But she's also very independent and wanting to do things on her own, you know, like I'm that way too. Like I very much like to be self-sufficient. She's very much self-sufficient. She knows how to work on cars. I love that. I love how she knows how to work on cars. So yeah, I just really like her character. She's such an interesting character. And yeah, the more like you open her books, the more you read about her, the more you're like, I like her. I like the more, it's like more onions are peeled. You know, there's more layers of her onion are peeled, you know, where I kind of feel like she's one of those onion characters where she has multiple layers, you know, that you have to peel back, and you discover more things about her. And I love the fact that, you know, I don't read a lot of stories where it's Native American, you know, where she's like, you know, she is part Native American. I don't read a lot of stories with that. Like there's a lot of like pop culture, a lot of things where Native Americans, or like what they'd say indigenous people, where you don't see it a lot in the culture, and it's very much lacking. And they're kind of like they are a culture, and they are a race that have been erased, you know, I guess you'd say, that they're not talked about a lot. And so I like seeing stories where the person is like Native American or partial Native American. I like that. I do like those stories. Like I always liked Pocahontas. I like the story of Pocahontas, even though reality, I'm like, oh God, it's such a sad story when you hear about it. Like she didn't live a very long life. But I loved that story, you know, like I liked the Disney story. It had more of a happier kind of tone to it. But I always liked learning about that culture. So I like stories with like like either Native American, or you'd hear about maybe Native American culture and like the myths or the stories that they have that they've kept over the years. I always like hearing about that. It's always interesting. Like, you know, they'll say like different animals, or like spirit animals and different things like that. I like learning about that. It's fairly interesting. So I like this story too, but like she's just this badass, you know, Native American or half Native American woman, and she's very strong. And I just, yeah, she's a good character. I really, really like her a lot. So the next one I would say that I'm a fan of is there was this series that was the Stay a Spell series by Juliet Cross. The second book, book number 2, Don't Hex and Drive, I absolutely loved Isadora. Isadora is probably my favorite of the Savoy sisters. Savoy, I think it's how you say it. She was my favorite. I think I empathize with her a lot because she was very much a introvert, and I'm like, girl, I'm same. She also was like a healer in a way, because she would kind of like, I believe her power, if I remember correctly, I believe her power, like she was able to like prolong like life, you know, and things like that. I think that's what her power was. But I loved her. I loved her determination, and the fact that, you know, she first meets the hero because he hit her with his car. He wasn't paying attention. And she was riding her bike, and I'm like, oh, girl, a girl after my own heart. I prefer to bike, you know, like I would prefer to bike down the street rather than getting in a car and drive. I'm not a huge fan of cars, even though it's obviously quicker to get someplace. But I like, if I could live in a town where a lot of people like bike and all that stuff, oh man, I would dig that, you know, like more bikes, less cars, because I like more of that quiet type of, where you can like ride your bike down the street and not have to worry about like getting hit and all that stuff, you know, just like you live in a small town and you're okay to like ride your bike to like the town and get like supplies and stuff like that, you know. I like more of that type of thing. So I love the fact that she rode her bike everywhere, and I love that when she meets him, like she absolutely like hates him. And then he has to like, I wouldn't say grovel, but he has to like prove himself to her in order for her to like to fall for him. Like, even though she is attracted to him, she doesn't want to admit that she's attracted to him. So I loved her like stubbornness, and like I said, she reminded me like very similar to me. And like I said, I try not to self-insert, but I liked her a lot because I was like, girl, I could so identify with this, you know, character because of her being an introvert and liking to like sit down and read and do like be very self-sufficient and do things on her own. I would totally be her friend, you know. I would definitely be her friend. I mean, like, you know, we're having a book club and, you know, doing all that stuff. So I very much would hang out with her, you know, like if I was to have any friends, you know, that would be my friend right here. It would be Isadora. I loved her, and then, you know, she ended up getting involved with, you know, things that the hero was doing, and she was like, hey, I want to help, you know, in any way and everything. So I love that too. But yeah, I really liked her a lot. She was funny. She made me laugh too. I liked her character a lot. So yeah, she was a favorite. The next one I would talk about is Chloe from Homestead. I really liked her character because at the beginning of it, you find out that after Impact, her grandfather took on the raising of her, and he had lived in this cabin which was very like, he did this cabin in a way to, it became like very self-sustaining. So you had a way of getting fresh water, having food, you know, he'd have canned food and all this other stuff. And he had developed, he had obviously put on like solar panels and different things like that. So made it to where you could get your, you could still have like a shower working and all that stuff, and also have electric and different things like that. Very cool. This man was very smart. So her grandfather was very smart, and he kind of, you know, he taught her different things, but he also unfortunately made her very ignorant of like being self-sufficient, to the point of like they have to go out on a run to go get more cans and food and stuff like that, because they were running low. And I mean, he was stocked for years, so they obviously had gotten to that point where it was like how many years after impact where they had to go out and get supplies. And right as they're out and about, this biker gang like gangs up on him and kills her grandfather. Like he gets shot in the neck, and he's killed like almost instantly. And now she's like, what do I do? And this man comes across and ends up saving her, and ends up becoming the hero, you know, the man she gets involved with, Jimmy. And Jimmy has lived on a farm for many years, like with his parents and other family and other people like in that community. And so he ends up bringing her in to his farming community, and tells her like, I am attracted to you, I like you, and would you be willing to basically be my wife and live in my home and like take care of all the domestic stuff inside the house, and I'll handle all the stuff on the outside, you know? I love the fact that she ended up becoming more self-sufficient, and also the fact that she was she had self-preservation. And so she used it in a way of like, well, this man seems like a good man, and that he'll take care of me, and all I have to do is just obviously have sex with him and take care of the home, and I'll be okay. Because that was basically what she had to do with like her grandfather, obviously not having sex with him, you know, ew, but she was taking care of all the stuff in the home, and her grandfather was the one that was taking care of all the stuff on the outside. So he'd hunt for food and different things like that. So obviously that's the stuff that Jimmy decides to do. Jimmy's like, you could be my wife and we could have sex. You know, obviously he's going to be gentle with her and everything like that, you know, and obviously on her time, you know. And I respected that too from the hero. But she didn't really know how to do much of anything really, and she felt very I loved how I felt like she felt like she was useless. Like, I don't know how I'm gonna be able to like what was the thing, feel like that she was a part of the community. So I love the fact that she was very determined to learn how to be self-sufficient, how to learn how to clean clothes like the old-fashioned way, learn how to you know, learn how to farm, you know, because farming is not easy. It's not easy to do. People think like, this is the thing I hate about, like, there's a stereotype that farmers are stupid, and I'm like, if you think farmers are so dumb, how do you think grocery stores are filled? How do you think there are farmers markets? You have to know how to plant, and where to plant, and what to plant for different seasons, and what type of fertilizer, different things like that. That's not easy to do. So I hate that whole insult where people think farmers are stupid. We would be dead right now. We would be starving if it wasn't for farmers. So I love the fact that her character very much is like, I need to learn. I need to learn this. I need to learn how to be self-sufficient, take care of myself, and take care of Jimmy, you know, and be that like domestic homemaker kind of thing. But I also love the fact that he was trying to teach her stuff outside of the home. So it's like, hey, if something happens to me, you could be okay by yourself, you know? I love the fact of the him doing that too, and her being receptacle, was it receptacle? Whatever it is, receptible to that, whatever the term is. Receptible, you're right? Yeah. To that. And I love that of her character, that she was very like determined to learn, so she can be independent, I love that. I love that about her. She didn't cower. She didn't, she didn't go and like whine and complain. She did it. She did the work, even though it was hard work. Like by the time they'd be done, they'd be exhausted. And that's the other thing about farming. It's exhaustive work. It's back-breaking work, So yeah, I really liked her character a lot. She was a really interesting character. And so that's why she's definitely like another favorite of mine when it came to like that series. So the last one I'll talk about for this video is, No, I didn't. I have to get the cover for that book. This one here, Tabitha, When She's Weary. This character here she had gotten, this is Ruby Dixon, so this is a part of the Rizza-verse series. So these are all women who were at once, had gotten kidnapped by aliens and had gotten enslaved by aliens. And so they ended up becoming rescued. And so she's one of the women that ended up becoming rescued and put on this planet where this, I guess you'd say king, he owns the planet. He owns the planet, he lives there, and he wants to make sure that these women are taken care of, because he knows that he can't take them back to Earth. Earth, in a way that they know of is either they're not able to do it because it's like, I guess you'd say the aliens took them illegally, because we are that type of class planet where the alien government, whatever it is out in space, tells other alien creatures that, hey, leave them alone, like they're not a part of, everything. So humans were basically illegally taken. And so obviously some women were cloned, and then there were other women who were used as like slaves, sex slaves, things like that. So some of these women were sexually abused. And so her character was very much like she was abused, and so it made her very hyper vigilant of keeping her place guarded from possible predators and things like that. Besides animal predators, but male predators. And so it made her very hyper aware. And so I loved her character because not only was she very smart, like she had booby traps. She had booby traps, in her yard. And I'm like, good for you, girl. Good for you. Good for you. And so I loved her character for that. But I loved the fact that what was it again? The cat species. I want to say Masak, but it's not. The Masaka were the blue aliens. These here were, oh man, it's in my head. It's on the tip of my tongue. But this cat species that's there. So she ends up getting one on her doorstep, this cat species that is, looks like a man, but is, looks like, a cat and stuff. So he's there and he's kind of going through almost like a heat because his brother, I think it was his brother or his friend, I can't remember the character, is going through like a heat thing with his mate. And so if they're in any kind of like vicinity, they can also kind of feel it too. And also they have this stuff that's called, I think it's called nori, and it's basically like a catnip. And so the catnip is in the vicinity and he smells it. And so it's causing him to kind of go in like a heat. And so he's trying to get away from it, and he ends up being on her doorstep, and she's like, get the heck out of here or I'm going to hit you with something. And so I love the fact that she was very determined of like, hey, you get off my porch, you know, go away. And he was like asking her, can you help me? And she's like, heck no, go away. And she was very stubborn. I loved her stubbornness, and it was for self-preservation. I don't blame her. But she was also hilarious because she would go and throw these insults to him, and he just took them. And I thought it was so funny that he would just took them, because he obviously knew she was hurt in the past. And so that's why he was trying to be gentle with her. And I loved how he took his time with her, because she really needed someone to be patient with her and give her time to get to that point of accepting somebody into her life intimately with what she had dealt with in her past. So I just love the fact that she made herself vulnerable again to accept somebody into her life, you know. But I loved her because she was, like I said, she was so funny. She made me laugh multiple times in the book. She was funny. She was great. And she did also have that like protective instinct where she wanted to take care of him, you know, even though she didn't want to admit that she did, but she did. She wanted to take care of him. And she liked having someone there because, you know, she ultimately was lonely as well, you know, even though she was scared of other people and scared of anybody who, you know, like any man kind of getting close to her, she was still lonely and, you know, needed somebody to help with the loneliness. But yeah, I really liked her character a lot. She's definitely a favorite, another favorite of mine when it comes to like Ruby Dixon. I do have some favorites of Ruby Dixon's characters, and yeah, she definitely is one of my favorites is her. But yeah, that's pretty much it for this video here. Do you have a favorite heroine in a book? Let me know which is your favorite heroine. Maybe we have the same heroine, you know. But yeah, that's it for this video. Have yourself a good day. Take care of yourselves, be kind to each other, and I'll see you all on the next video. All right, bye.